Hey there, and welcome to the Overcomers Overcoming Podcast. It is great to have you join us. This podcast series features those who have gained victory over a life encounter. With that life experience, we encourage those who are experiencing something that might seem to be insurmountable. We advance and encourage others by passing forward evaluated life experiences. We have three objectives in this podcast series. We want to encourage those who are engaged in any type of life encounter by offering to walk with you to help you gain victory over anything that might seem impossible. We want to share our experience to help you. Our second objective is to help you develop a confident resolve that there are multiple options to get past any life obstacle. It's a matter of thinking into the situation. Our third objective is to help you with critical thinking skills. If you are facing a dilemma resulting from a previous decision you wish you could reverse, we want to help you think into all of the facts and factors involved in making an informed decision. I'm Ron Cooper, founder of the Cooper Culture. I'm with my wife and business manager, Marty. Together, we are the Cooper Culture Company who is sponsoring this podcast series. Today we feature Elizabeth Bennett, who describes to us some of the life lessons learned from her 35 years of being a school principal. She relates it to the book she wrote, Courageous Conversations. She discusses some of the things that families can learn from functionality within their families and some things that are not happening well in the family that are carried into the school life. And some of those things leading into the school life result in some bullying and some other facets of life that we wish weren't there, but we have to deal with. It's very interesting, Marty, her life experiences as a teacher that have a correlation with normal life and functioning families. What are some of the takeaways you got from Elizabeth and her life experience?
I want to thank Elizabeth for her 35 years of dedication to children and their well-being as a teacher and school principal, as you mentioned. And through her experiences of working with children, getting to know them, understand how they think, learn, and have conversations, she is taking that experience and speaking at teacher conferences, along with coaching teachers and parents to pass forward what she has learned for them to have a better relationship with their students or children.
Elizabeth has a lot she's passing on to us. Let's listen and learn together. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. For our listeners, we want for them to know you are a 35-year plus award-winning school principal. I think you have a lot of experience our listeners will gain from. Put it into context of COVID, and it's just my perception, maybe COVID, learning, the isolation from that and so forth, in the context of relationships, that I just sense that maybe there's a negative that has come from those kind of things. I'm guessing that you have a lot of experience. You can address some of those things from our listeners' perspective. Elizabeth, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me this morning.
I don't want to necessarily direct your conversation and your thinking, but have you seen it also that relationships may be deteriorating in the schools, or some just don't take the time to establish meaningful relationships, which then can go off and take some people into the bushes, my term?
To go back to your original thought about what happened with the pandemic. So here are two sides of what I experienced and what I saw with families. Some of them had a really already grounded and wonderful relationship with their kids. And so it gave them even more time because naturally they were working from home as well as their children being in their studies, whatever that looked like. Because certainly for our school district, we helped to support families in terms of technology if they were without laptops or Chromebooks or whatever. So we were able to help with that so that kids could stay on track. We also had scheduled times in the days where teachers would meet with their students to go through classwork and help them with special projects, or have like open office hours so that students could come and say, hey, miss, or hey, sir, I'm having some challenges with this, or is this what you want me to do? And then those family units had that extra time to be able to be supportive of each other, to have some fun, to do some extra activities. Although they couldn't get out too often to do them, they still had those connection times. Here's what we had on the other side of that, where we had dysfunction. Families were already in a place of dysfunction, whether it was alcoholism or drug use or whatever kinds of challenges were within that family unit. And then those kids were stuck in that for that period of time. So there were those challenging times for kids where, they didn't have anybody else to speak to other than just doing their work at school and holding themselves together as best as they could. So that you could see had some destructive tendencies and some things where kids, in some cases, were delighted to get back to school because that was their safe space.
Very well said. Our listeners are very interested in your insights in what you perceive as well-grounded families. We, too, have heard from various students, I'd rather be at school than be at home. And I can easily read into that, but I'm very curious what your insights are into those families that you consider well-grounded. Others can learn from that.
Well, and like when I think of one or two families that I work with from the standpoint of, the parents come and volunteer when they can. And granted, they're working, but they still want to take maybe a day here or there to have some time with their kids at school, to see what they're up to volunteer their time, to model that it's okay to leave the rest of that world out there to be with your kids. Because that's what we're noticing is one of the things that's missing, is that real connection with each other. And I'm sure you're going to ask me about that later, because I certainly have stories for it. But from that perspective, families that already work together have open communication. They are vulnerable with each other. They have what I call courageous conversations, which is based on work that I've done with my book. And so they have a space where they get uncomfortable with some of those conversations so that they can really understand and value each other and get to a space where they know really what's going on with their kids and not just, hey, hi, how was your day? Because I have a story about that too.
Talk to us about courageous conversation. Several things come to mind. One of them is I need to have a difficult conversation with, and then fill in the blank with, could be a family member, it could be someone in the workplace. I just need to have this conversation because, and it may be because their behavior is not aligned with my expectations, something to that degree. How do you encourage someone to have that maybe difficult conversation? You, I believe, call it a courageous conversation. How do we gather the courage to do what may feel like this is going to be very uncomfortable?
Well, the first thing is to recognize that we need to get out of our comfort zone. And that's why I chose the term courageous conversation, because you need to be able to step out. You need to be able to have some vulnerability and to be able to get out of your comfort zone and be okay with not knowing everything and be okay with just saying, look at this, the relationship that we have at the moment doesn't feel like it's working as well as I think it could be, right? So you're recognizing without it being, because this is not remotely about judgment. I am not in the space to judge families on how they do stuff. What I want to do is just look at where we are right at this moment and be able to say, move some of that judgment out of the way, move some of those fears and anxiety out of the way, and simply just recognize first how we're showing up and what is it that we're doing.
Are you talking about the parent, how the parent is showing up, or the student is showing up?
Well, we could look at both sides. So from the parent perspective, I help parents understand, because when I'm coaching them, I help them understand that all this stuff back here is our past. And I always point back there because I like to keep it back there. However, what ends up happening is whether it's subconscious, whether it's, pattern behavior, whether it's the way we were brought up, the stuff that went on that left an impact on us. That's what shows up for us every day. That's how we show up. So I refer to it as a filter. So we have a filter in the way we speak, in the way we see things, and the way we hear things. And our children have them as well. Now, they might not be as experienced because naturally they're significantly younger. And so they don't have lots of that, what we call baggage stuff behind them, but they do have their own filters. One of their filters is the way that they hear their parents. So if their parents are constantly yelling or nagging, or that's the impression that the kids have, that's what they're going to continue to hear. And so the parent needs to look at it from the perspective of being responsible for how they're showing, how the parent is showing up, and saying, you know what, I recognize that this is sometimes how I show up. I show up this way because it's frustrating when you don't make your bed or you don't clean your room, or yes, and it probably sounds to you like I'm nagging you. But here's what I really want to do. I would like you to do those things because it's a contribution to our home. And so we're shifting the perspective of how we're explaining it too, and not simply just in that space of the nagging piece, or my parents are always yelling at me, because that doesn't serve a purpose for anybody. And so being able to recognize that and saying, okay, so how can we work together to make things work better in our home? And inviting your teen or your young person into saying, yes, you have a contribution, and yes, I want to value you for who you are, and so on. How can we work together to contribute to everything so that our home works better, and so that we have a different kind of relationship with each other?
Marty and I are not classroom teachers, but I can perceive that your teachers inherit into the classroom what learned behavior from the home. And in that context, the teacher might know they may observe behavior they feel certainly is rooted at home, but how can the teacher help transform the mindset? And this, I'm asking you a question that you may not even address for the teachers, but it would seem to me that there is an aspect of the teacher understanding that very possibly they're bringing into the classroom what it is in home. So how do you help the student transform to a better mindset at school, or the teacher transform themselves to understand that student better? That may be too complex a question to respond to in this short amount of time.
Okay, so a couple of things. One of them is, and certainly in the school district that I worked in as a teacher and then as an administrator, what we help to promote with our teachers is a space of compassion and understanding and empathy, so that they could create a space in their classroom to be inviting, to have those connections with students. And even when I speak to teachers now, because I just came back from several teachers' conventions, because they usually happen around now, and what I encourage teachers to do is from time to time, choose 4 or 5 students in the classroom and ask them a question that's outside of the curriculum. Find out something else that's going on in their life, whether they happen to be in dance or athletics, or or they've got something that's going on in their life that they might like to celebrate. Because sometimes kids are nervous or shy, or don't think they're being valued. And so this is a space for them to really have a connection with their kids. And so that way, when kids feel safe in a classroom and they feel that they really can engage, and in most cases, if they like the teacher, then there's a different kind of space for them to be flourishing in their classroom. And we also invite the teachers to model things like, what's it like to be a good leader? And talk about that and relate it within their subject area, so that they can see that there's a possibility for kids to do that. And not so much, because I try not to emphasize so much in the future, but how do we help kids be leaders right now? How do we help them feel powerful and have a good feeling for themselves, like right now? And those are things that we encourage teachers to weave in and to blend into their teaching throughout the day.
I'm interested in your thoughts on social media. I call social media faceless, voiceless. Each of us were invented long before social media, internet, and so forth. Social media has some very good benefits, but it also has, in my opinion, some very big drawbacks in that. And that's from my perspective. Social media being faceless, voiceless, I can make comments, and I use the term we too often become keyboard warriors. I can up you, whatever you said about me, I can escalate and so forth. Do you find that sometimes we just have to bring the younger people away from the social media, or at least help them deal with that aspect?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because that is one of the topics that I talk about with parents, particularly if I'm doing presentations or so on, because social media, as wonderful it is as a tool for connection and communication. So here's an example. You're in Maryland and I happen to be in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and we're having this conversation. That's a bonus. Being able to acquire bits and pieces of information, although not all is true, but at least it's a space for us to be able to engage and to gather information from the internet and from sources like Google and so on. Here's the downside. Social isolation is on the increase, and it's a rapid increase, because we often get into this space where we dull out from the world and we're busy flipping through our Facebook or whatever social media platform you happen to be on, because we're looking for likes. We're looking for approval. We're looking for some sense of being in that perfect virtual world that takes us away from the reality of what's going on in our life. Now, granted, from time to time, that's not a bad thing. So if you're playing a game on your phone, or if you're, watching a Netflix movie or whatever, but it's also a balance. And it's a balance that we need to encourage both our children and us as adults. Because what I've noticed is recently I was in a restaurant and there were 5 or 6 people at the next table, and they all had their heads down. Now, I'm sure they weren't looking at their crotch. So here they are looking at their phones, right? 6 of them sitting at a table. Not one of them is speaking to each other. Help me understand how that's open communication. Why would you be spending all that money sitting at a table when you're not even having conversation or really even engaging in eating with each other? So there needs to be a space where we have a balance with that. And that's one of the 5 strategies of dedicated listening that I talk about in my book. And that really is about dedicated time. We need to have dedicated time with each child individually, because everyone has a different personality. Everyone has unique abilities, gifts, talents, and so on. And we need to be able to relate to them. Well, we can't do that if we've got our phone in our hand and we're flipping through Facebook, we're watching a movie, and we're having that conversation with our teen or each other as a partner. So we need to put down the cell phone. We need to turn off the technology. We need to get away from that and get outside or go someplace together. Sing and dance in the rain. Be outlandish and have some fun with each other, because the expense of that is possibly losing your child. And what I talk about as one of the pieces that go along with social isolation is the whole idea that bullying is rampant, mental health concerns are through the roof, social isolation is on the increase, and now suicide is the second cause of death of teens. Kids as young as 8 and 9 are taking their lives. Why is that happening? Why is that up here in front of us? We need to be doing something together collectively, so that no longer becomes one of the top 10 statistics. These are our children.
You've struck a very responsive chord with Marty, me, and our listeners in that mental health, suicidal tendencies, and the like, we know are on the increase. And I mentioned that Marty and I are not trained psychologists and so forth, but one of the things I want to do is help our listeners pick up on, and I want to make sure we understand, I have no desire to label or stigmatize anybody, but I am a person who wants to pick up on various data points, meaning if I can pick up on something someone said that would lead me to think that, well, maybe you have some negative thoughts, which frequently those negative thoughts generate into could be depressive thoughts, which could then lead further to. Can I pick up on some of those things? And without even mentioning the topic, for a guy, I may say, let's go out and change the tire on this vehicle. That's a very operative word to me, meaning us together. Let's us go out and do something together. And through that, maybe I can help you overcome any feelings of inferiority. You're not sure what your worth is and so forth. Elizabeth, with that, I've just described a little bit of what my early life used to be, but I am the kind of person, I think that life experience sometimes is more valuable than the degree on the wall. And for those listeners, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not marginalizing degrees, not at all. But I am saying that you don't necessarily have to have a degree to understand someone. And I'm sensing your book, Courageous Conversations, may address some aspects such as that. Life experience is something that is very valuable. In addition to listening, we can pick up on a lot of things.
Yeah, and that's part of what I, give suggestions to parents about, is the whole idea that it doesn't necessarily need to be that, you're psychoanalyzing, but really it's about having conversation, and it's about having communication with each other and understanding. And you mentioned something earlier that I also speak about, and that's being curiously engaged. So rather than just asking a question, and I'll give you a brief example of this. So you're at home during the day, as an example, and one of your children comes home and you say, hey, honey, how was your day, right? You're excited and enthusiastic because you haven't seen them all day. And so they say fine, which is, one of the 4-letter words that's not particularly, fine, okay, good, nice. And then sometimes in between them, there's something like nothing. That's another word. Well, what did you do all day? Well, nothing. Well, what do you mean? You were away 8 hours. How is it that you didn't do anything, right? And there's that heightened, you're beginning to get a little heightened because it's frustrating and you want to know, right? Your heart centered in that space of wanting to know what happened with your kids. So what do you mean you did nothing all day? And up goes the hoodie, in go the earbuds, out comes the cell phone, and away goes your kid. They're heartbroken and upset and frustrated because you didn't ask them about them. You asked about their day, which is out there, which is school. And sometimes kids don't want to talk about it right away. You're left anxious and upset and frustrated and so on. And you're also heartbroken because you were asking a question that you thought was reasonable, which it is. However, what we need to be looking at is, okay, well, that question didn't work out quite so well. Or say, you know what? I just wanted to know what was going on with you because we haven't had any conversation lately. I've noticed that you've been a little sad or a little frustrated, a little something. And when you choose one of those words, if it isn't the appropriate word, they will tell you. They'll tell you, no, that's not how I'm feeling. Okay, well, then help me understand a little bit more about what's going on. I really want to connect with you. I want to make sure that you're okay, right? Because our first thought as parents and as educators is, and we're very good at doing it, and that's solving problems. We want to solve a problem because we don't want our kids to be hurt. We don't want them to be frustrated or upset or have things going on that are bad for them. Sometimes we need to push that aside. We need to be able to understand what's going on for them, because we know that behaviors are complex and we know that emotions run high. And in most cases, kids don't know how to deal with them particularly well because they don't have skills or they don't have strategies yet, or they're in the process of learning them. But we also know about brain and the brain function, particularly in the frontal lobe, the front part of our head. We imagine, because that's what we've been taught along the way to understand, is that our brain function develops at the same time as our age does. And that's not so. We know that now, that typically it's not until kids are in their 20s that they really sort of get themselves together, right? And even as adults, from time to time, we don't have it together and we don't make the best choices, but they have less experience, less strategies, less skills. And so we need to help them understand and develop them along the way, and really not respond or react to the behavior, but finding out what's going on underneath that behavior. What's making you so angry? And that's the space that I talk about, conversation expanders, delving into saying, okay, so, I haven't seen your buddies coming by the house, or, you seem to be spending a great deal more time by yourself. What's going on there? And not trying to stay away from the close-ended questions, because the yes or no answers, that they're not very helpful. Or you could say, okay, so tell me a little bit more about that. When I see, or when you said this to me, and have some of the words that they've said, say them back. So when you said you were feeling like this, what did you mean by that? So that I really clearly understand what's going on, because we're very good at taking it on as face value. I'm fine, I'm good, I'm this, I'm that. And we do that even as adults, right? Somebody say, hi, how you doing? Yeah, fine, great. And off you go. Meanwhile, a husband or a wife could be ill at home, or there could be some tragic event, or there could be something that's going on in their workplace. And they don't take that time because they don't know whether you're really interested or not. But with your children, you need to be. And we often just, oh, well, I'll leave them alone for now. And that's great. Sometimes they need that time for processing, but other times we need to reconnect with them. And so changing a tire, or going for a drive with one of your children, taking them out, or going for a walk, or whatever, so that there's an opportunity to spend that time and find out about what's going on. And if parents are having a tough time with starting that kind of conversation, my suggestion to them is about, okay, so let's look at a world event, or let's look at something that I might have read an article, or I just heard a podcast, and this is sort of the story about it. What do you think? And leaving the space for quiet while they process their answer, and not having judgment or, well, that's a silly thing. Leave that aside and allow them to speak, and allow them to say, well, this is what I think about it, or this is what I would do. And commenting from a perspective of saying, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of it from that perspective. And allowing that space, because we're very quick to wanting to fill the space of quiet. We, as adults, we talk a lot, and we engage in that conversation, or we have a response, or we have a thought. We often think and speak faster than we listen. And we need to be able to leave some of that time of listening first, and being okay with the silence, because it's not anything. It's just quiet.
Conversation expanders. The conversation to this point is somewhat necessarily focused on school-age children, but I want to expand this at this point to any type of relationship. Let me just explain what I mean. Anytime a person arrives in the house coming from somewhere and someone has been in the house for a while, can we project how they may be feeling, what they have been through before we start talking about ourselves? When someone comes into the home, the children, then we want to know about their day. Let's try to project ourselves to want to know more about them, how they're feeling, and allow them to just open up. We need to learn to listen, empathize, adapt to, and show we care about others more so than ourselves. Our relationships are going to improve significantly when we are able to do just that. There's a lot of perceptive thoughts there. I am, as I mentioned, I'm a self-described incurably curious person now, but I was not earlier in life because I thought questions I asked just amplified the fact that I'm dumb and stupid. And so I remain silent too often in my life. So I use the expression I'm making up for lost time now by asking a whole lot of questions. I use the term active listening, and whether that's still a usable or an active term, I don't know,
Yeah.
but it is a matter of just listening to a person, asking open-ended questions, and being perceptive to understand what the person is saying. One aspect of active listening is, did I process what you just said correctly? Did I hear you correctly? Is this what you said? Because I may not have heard you correctly. And one of the things that I pick up on real easy, and I know others do as well, we need to project ourselves as being a safe space. You mentioned early on being appropriate. I use the term appropriately vulnerable, but we need to let that person know we are a safe space. In other words, we're not going to take anything you say and use it against you. I'm verbalizing a part of my early life that I didn't feel that I could express myself. One, I didn't necessarily, I mean, if you asked me when you don't seem like you're very good today, what's wrong? And I probably would have answered it. I don't know. And I was serious. I did not know.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other thing is, if I did know, I wouldn't want to be honest with you because, I don't know, maybe you'd institutionalize me because, my gosh, how could you think that something so terrible as that? I'm talking too much, Elizabeth, but I'm just saying that we, I believe, need to be very receptive to others. We need to be perceptive of others, that there could be some underlying challenges a person is having, and they may not feel comfortable even expressing it until we prove ourselves to be that safe space. I think that's how I'm perceiving a lot of what you're saying.
Well, and you're right about that, because people won't share if they don't feel safe, because that's one of the common elements of our grounding with each other, even within ourselves. If I don't feel safe, how is it that I'm going to want to share with you? So that's part of the foundational skills that I try and help parents with, to say, okay, so what do we need to do differently? What are some things that could happen? And one of them is what you're saying about being able to create a space where people feel safe, and also being able to recognize and walk alongside and, have empathy for what's going on. We don't necessarily always have to solve the problem. Sometimes that's not what's meant to happen in that relationship. And it's a good question to ask your kids, is to say, what would you like me to do? Even as partners for yourselves. If something happens with Marty, and you can say to her, how do you want me to react in this conversation? Do you want me to just listen? Do you want some help with solving the problem? Do you want me to walk alongside? What else would you like me to do? So that then she has an opportunity to say, oh, all I want to do is just vent. So you don't have to do anything. You just need, and that's part of what we can ask of our kids as well.
I'll tell you, one aspect of our marriage is don't try to solve a problem, just listen. And so very characteristic of a marriage, but we have just a few minutes left.
I think it's great that you explain we need to stop asking questions of our children, and maybe ask a question. If they don't want to answer, that's okay. And we need to be okay with that.
Yes. However, coming back around maybe later on and saying, you know what, maybe you need some time. Do you need some time? You've just come home from school. You've just been away for 6 or 7 or 8 hours. That's a tumultuous time all by itself, going to classes and so on. Give that child some time, some space, or, sit and have a snack together or whatever and talk about something else. But being okay with that space, but not allowing it to continue too long that you don't know what's going on, because that's part of what the challenges are. Because for parents who have come to see me to tell me that they've lost their child, and they say, I had no idea.
Yes, that's a terrible thing to have happen. And my hope is through conversations such as this, we can pick up on different things that can lead us to taking the appropriate action so that, and I'm the kind of person who would rather say, I apologize rather than having to eulogize. I apologize if I did not understand you. I did not spend enough time with you, but would rather that than the eulogize. But as we bring this in for a closing, Elizabeth, I want to thank you on behalf of our listeners. How can our listeners get your book, Courageous Conversation?
They can get it on my website. So it's www.courageousnetwork.com.
Great. Elizabeth, I want to thank you for dedicating your life to teaching, and then a follow-on to that is helping others with your evaluated life experiences. It is my perception that we have, because of the pandemic, have had various dynamics occur. We need to be very receptive to that and be proactive in trying to bring about change in a very positive way, but we need to learn how to make those dynamics happen. And I think it's a very advancing way. That's just some of my thoughts. But on behalf of our listeners, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you today.
Courageous Conversations. The theme of this podcast, the theme of Elizabeth's book, Courageous Conversations, has a lot to do, I think, an overarching principle with relational harmony. And the harmony is a matter of us getting along with each other, knowing there are going to be difficult times. There are times when we disagree. But if the core of our family relationship is harmonious, that is, we are well grounded in principles, we know the values we represent, we want, we feel confident enough about ourselves that we can assess where we are versus where we want to be. Do I have the courage to confront others? The term confront frequently is a term that puts people off because they think confronting means you're going to be argumentative, combative, disagreeable, something of that nature. But confronting, to me, merely means you're willing to talk with someone about a topic. When we're talking, there's an art of listening. There is the axiom, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, with the axiom meaning we should be willing to listen more than we are to talk. In the context of harmonious relationships and the desire to understand each other, adapt to each other, I think it has a lot to do with being willing to listen. Am I willing to listen to you, not just to remain silent, that is, I'm not speaking, but if I have a desire to learn more about you, to know your personality, to know any troubles you may be experiencing, to be able to show empathy with whatever you may be experiencing in life. And I truly, and from the heart, want to know about you. As we apply those principles, we listen, we know what we're listening for. We are not attempting to be judgmental or to assess anybody for who they are not, but rather we're just listening for those data points that tell us a little bit about the person with whom we're speaking. We adapt to them, we meet their needs, and really the conversation is about them. And when that person knows we are about them, we want to learn about them, and not to be a psychotherapist or anything of that nature, but we're just showing we care enough about that person to want to have a genuine, authentic relationship with them. Should we prove to be a safe space such that they feel confident they can confide anything in us? Do we have the confidence we can listen to, maybe assess, and if we're the right person to help that person overcome whatever they are experiencing, then help with that. If someone else is better at helping them through whatever they're experiencing, then we are an effective catalyst to help that person through whatever they are experiencing. But we are the right person to help them because we understand them, we want to understand them, and it is about those harmonious relationships, and if necessary, having the courage to confront and try to get to the root of whatever it is we're dealing with. Coaching is a necessary help for many people. Everybody can benefit from a coach. Marty and I are certified Maxwell Leadership Certified Team Coaches. We help people with personal performance. We know in some cases, and Marty and I have been through it ourselves, we are being coached. We know coaching can help us overcome any challenges we may be working with, attempting to work through. The more we have access to a coach who is very empathetic and knows the right open-ended questions to ask, we can help people discover whatever it is that is holding them back from performing at their God-given potential. Contact Marty and me at ron@thecooperculture.com or Marty, M-A-R-T-Y, at thecooperculture.com. Let's schedule a 30-minute complimentary coaching session through which we can help you determine if we can help you through whatever you may be experiencing. We hope we can warrant a 5-star review rating with this podcast series. We hope you will want to engage in making comments. We hope you'll also want to share this podcast with your Facebook friends, your LinkedIn connections, your Twitter and Instagram communities. The more we share and expose ideas we have to reach out to others, the greater opportunity will be and we will have to advance each other with a heart to want to advance each other and be an effective catalyst to engage in other people's lives, the greater opportunity we're going to have to overcome some of the challenges we're experiencing, such as bullying, some of the suicidal thoughts that people have, the isolation that some people are experiencing. Let's work with each other to reach out to others in a manner where we show empathy, courage, and compassion to help each other overcome anything we may be experiencing in life. We are also keynote speakers. You can find us at espeakers.com. You can also learn more about Marty and me at thecooperculture.com. If we can help you in any way, let's work together and let's share some ideas. Our heart desire is to advance people within our circle of influence.